Have you ever wondered why certain people seem to effortlessly ruin your day while you're left picking up the emotional pieces? Why does their negativity tear at your peace and their toxic words burn deep into your mind long after they're gone? Is it because you're weak, overly sensitive? Or is society simply giving you the wrong tools? The uncomfortable truth is, most of us have been conditioned to react, to surrender our power at the first sign of hostility or manipulation. But what if everything you believed about dealing with toxic people was completely backwards? What if true power isn't about fighting fire with fire, but mastering the art of absolute emotional control? By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how you're unconsciously allowing toxic people to control you, and more importantly, how to reclaim that power for good. Imagine standing guard over something precious, your peace, your happiness, your emotional balance. You've carefully built this space within yourself, stone by stone, making it strong yet comforting, protective yet open enough to experience life fully. But then someone arrives who seems intent on tearing down these walls, brick by brick. It's subtle at first, perhaps a critical remark disguised as helpful feedback, or a guilt trip so cleverly worded it leaves you doubting your own perceptions. Have you ever felt your energy drain away after interacting with someone like this? As if your internal fortress suddenly has cracks you can't quite pinpoint. You start second-guessing yourself, your confidence erodes, and your sense of clarity dims. This feeling isn't random. It's a clear indication of a toxic presence. Stoic philosopher Epictetus once wisely observed, "We suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgments about them." Recognizing the toxic individual is not merely identifying external behaviors, but understanding your internal reactions to them. You see, toxicity isn't powerful because of what it is, but because of how subtly it triggers emotional turmoil within us. A friend who always finds fault may seem trivial at first. Just small criticisms about your choices, your dreams, or your abilities. But over time, these seemingly minor comments accumulate, leaving behind a heavy burden of doubt and insecurity. Carl Jung warned us about the shadows we refuse to see clearly, saying, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." By clearly identifying toxic patterns, by naming them and seeing them fully, you begin to take back the power that these individuals hold over your emotional landscape. Yet, toxic behaviors aren't always overtly critical. Often they manifest through subtle manipulation, cloaked in charm or friendliness. Perhaps you've encountered someone who is always the victim, who expertly draws sympathy and guilt from those around them to control situations in their favor. Or maybe it's the silent manipulator who uses passive aggression, small sighs, pointed silences, or subtle comments to leave you feeling confused and unsettled. Marcus Aurelius teaches us that everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. Realizing that these manipulations are subjective interpretations and intentional distortions empowers you to detach emotionally from their destructive impact. Acknowledging toxic behaviors openly and honestly doesn't make you cynical. Rather, it's an act of emotional courage and clarity. You begin to see clearly who contributes positively to your life and who subtly erodes your inner peace. It's a transformative moment, a stoic awakening of sorts, where you decide that your emotional tranquility is no longer open for negotiation or sabotage. As Seneca said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." When you become vigilant about recognizing toxic threats, you stop imagining yourself as powerless and begin seeing yourself as the architect of your emotional world. You build higher walls of self-awareness, reinforce your boundaries with the strength of reason, and patrol your mental space with deliberate mindfulness. In doing this, you realize something incredibly empowering. The first and most powerful step in dealing with toxic people isn't confrontation, it's identification. Because once clearly seen, toxic individuals lose their most potent weapon, your unconscious participation in their games. Have you ever paused to consider why certain people continually disrupt your peace? It's tempting to blame their negativity, manipulation, or outright hostility. But could it be that the true culprit is actually your own hesitance to draw clear lines around what you'll accept? Many of us avoid setting firm boundaries because we fear confrontation or rejection. We worry about appearing selfish or uncaring, trapped by the mistaken belief that boundaries will drive others away. Yet, as Marcus Aurelius insightfully reminds us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Boundaries represent precisely that kind of strength, an internal shield, a quiet and powerful protection, crafted not from anger, but from self-respect and clarity. Imagine for a moment that your emotional world is like a garden, carefully tended and nurtured. Boundaries are like fences, gentle yet firm markers indicating where your personal space begins. Without these markers, weeds quickly invade, choking out the flowers you've patiently cultivated. That toxic co-worker who always complains or subtly undermines your efforts, the friend who constantly imposes guilt trips, leaving you feeling obligated and drained, they enter because no clear boundary signals that their behavior isn't welcome. Epictetus teaches us plainly, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. Setting boundaries means embracing your freedom, freedom from external negativity, manipulation, and emotional exploitation. Psychologist Carl Jung argued that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This profound insight reminds us that boundaries are not merely defensive, they're essential to authenticity. You cannot fully express who you truly are if you're continuously adapting yourself to accommodate toxic behaviors. By clearly communicating what you will and won't tolerate, you aren't punishing others. You're simply standing firm in your integrity and truth. It's not cruelty to declare, this behavior is unacceptable. It's kindness, both to yourself and to others. You're providing clarity, allowing genuine relationships to thrive, while those based on exploitation and negativity naturally fade away. Still, the very thought of boundary setting might stir unease within you. What if people react negatively, you might ask? Here again, Stoicism provides a comforting perspective. Seneca reminds us, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Anticipating confrontation is usually far worse than experiencing it. Often people respect clearly articulated boundaries more readily than we expect. Those who react negatively or push back aggressively reveal themselves clearly, confirming precisely why the boundary was needed in the first place. Remember, their discomfort with your boundaries reflects their limitations, not your worth or kindness. Boundaries serve another essential function. They nurture trust, both within yourself and within healthy relationships. When people clearly know your limits, they understand how to respect and interact positively with you. Relationships strengthened by healthy boundaries become far richer, safer, and more meaningful. Imagine interactions where mutual respect reigns, where you confidently express your needs without anxiety or guilt. Boundaries create these possibilities, gently guiding others in how best to treat you. There's something deeply frustrating about doing everything right. Setting clear boundaries, being calm, rational, assertive, and yet the toxic person still circles back, still finds a way to poke, prod, and press your emotional buttons. Why? Because for them, it was never about logic or resolution. It was always about reaction. about feeding off your emotional energy like a parasite thrives on a host. And the truth is, when confrontation fails to provoke you, they adapt their tactics. They try subtle digs, passive-aggressive jabs, guilt-laced statements carefully crafted to pull you back into the game. But what if the ultimate move wasn't to fight harder, argue smarter, or even assert louder? What if the real secret weapon was something far more subtle, becoming boring? That's where the idea of emotional neutrality comes in. The Stoics wouldn't call it apathy, they'd call it apatheia, the serene state of being undisturbed by things outside your control. It's not indifference because you don't care, it's indifference because you've chosen peace over performance. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed," he wasn't being naive. He was pointing to a deeper truth. The moment you stop playing the game collapses. Imagine yourself like a smooth stone on a riverbed. The water, the insults, the drama, the bait rushes over you, but never sinks in. You're still. You're ungraspable. You've become quite literally uninteresting to the emotional predator. Now, let's be clear. This doesn't mean becoming cold or emotionally shut off. It doesn't mean suppressing everything and pretending you don't feel. In fact, it requires a high level of emotional intelligence to stay aware, present, and grounded without getting pulled in. Carl Jung spoke of the importance of integrating the shadow, the darker, reactive parts of ourselves, rather than denying them. That means recognizing the urge to respond, the flare of anger, the heat of defensiveness, and choosing not to act on it. Not because you're weak, but because you're no longer willing to let someone else steer your emotional ship. The grey rock method, a term now often used in psychology, echoes Stoic principles to the core. You become emotionally flat, not hostile, not dramatic, just neutral, dull, predictable. Imagine responding to a manipulative comment not with rage or hurt, but with something like, or interesting, or even just silence. No eye roll, no sarcasm, no justification. It's the emotional equivalent of giving them nothing to hold on to. And without fuel, fire dies. Their need for control, their hunger for chaos, it starves. You see, toxic people aren't empowered by their words. They're empowered by your reaction to their words. Take that away, and what's left? They're just talking to themselves. That's what makes this approach so powerful. You reclaim your agency without ever having to raise your voice. You become a mirror that reflects nothing back. And in that silence, in that void of drama, the toxic person is confronted not with your pain, but with their own emptiness. It's counterintuitive at first. Everything in you might want to defend, explain, push back. But Stoic training teaches restraint. It teaches the discipline of not needing to win, because the real victory lies in your calm. Seneca once said, "He who is brave is free." And bravery here is resisting the pull into someone else's storm. It's the quiet refusal to be baited, triggered, or drawn out of your center. It's one thing to recognize manipulation when it shows up, wearing a mask of charm or subtle guilt. But it's another thing entirely when it shows up again, and again, and again. Manipulative people have a way of circling back, testing your limits not once, but repeatedly. They don't always come at you with force, they come with erosion, like water slowly wearing down stone, not with a single blow, but through 1,000 small, persistent pressures. They push. You say no. They reframe. You hold firm. They try again, hoping this time you'll bend just a little. And eventually, if you're not careful, they get what they want. Not because they overpowered you, but because they outlasted your resolve. This is where most people break, not because they're weak, but because they're tired. Tired of having the same conversation, tired of enforcing the same boundary, tired of feeling like they're the only one playing fair. But here's a Stoic insight worth holding close. If you are irritated by every rub, how will your mirror be polished? Marcus Aurelius reminds us that strength lies in endurance, not in avoidance. And in the face of manipulation, endurance is best expressed through calm repetition. Think of it as your emotional anchor, unchanging, unwavering, steady no matter how turbulent the waters get. Carl Jung believed that real transformation requires conscious confrontation. And this is one of those moments, not an explosive clash, but a repeated return to clarity. You state your boundary, then you state it again, not louder, not harsher, just with quiet, unshakable certainty. No, I'm not comfortable with that. No, I already said I can't help you with this. No, this isn't up for discussion. That kind of calm consistency confuses manipulators. They're used to people cracking, losing patience, escalating the situation, because emotional chaos is their playground. But when you don't feed the drama and you don't change the message, they run out of angles. This is what makes the broken record technique so effective. It's not flashy, but it's powerful. It's Stoic in its simplicity. You're not trying to convince. You're not trying to be liked. You're not even trying to be understood. You're just stating the truth, again and again, with the calm certainty of someone who knows their value. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." And in moments like these, every repetition becomes a reflection of your inner discipline. Think of it like fencing. You don't need to attack wildly or swing with full force. You just need to block, to parry, to maintain your stance. And over time, the opponent tires. The same happens emotionally. When you hold the line with grace, not resistance, you become immovable. And that's where your power lies. It's not about meeting force with force. It's about meeting manipulation with maturity, not backing down, but also not being baited. Some battles aren't loud. They don't come with shouting or obvious insults. Instead, they're quiet, calculated, and deceptively polite. That's the trickiest form of manipulation, when the attacks are subtle, when they hide behind sarcasm, veiled compliments, or questions that are just sharp enough to wound, but soft enough to deny. "Oh, I guess you're too busy for real friends." Or, "Wow, must be nice to not care what anyone thinks." These aren't just casual comments, they're bait. Hooks dangled in front of you, designed to pull you into a reaction. And the moment you bite, you're caught. Not just in their trap, but in their emotional reality. Now you're defending yourself. Now you're playing their game. This is where most people lose their power. Not in the dramatic confrontations, but in the subtle invitations to lose their calm. And that's why the Stoics warned against letting others dictate your emotional responses. Epictetus taught that if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. It's harsh, but it's true. The bait only works if you react. The insult only lands if you let it settle inside you. The manipulation only succeeds if you step into the trap and start justifying your value. Think of the toxic person like a fisherman, sitting back, watching, waiting. Every passive-aggressive jab is a lure. Every guilt trip is a shiny bait. They're testing your sensitivity, measuring your triggers, looking for the crack in your calm. But what happens when you don't bite? When you don't flinch, explain, or rise to their invitation? That silence, that emotional stillness, is not indifference in the cold sense. It's Stoic detachment. It's what the philosophers called apatheia. Not the absence of feeling, but the absence of needless suffering. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." When someone provokes you and you choose not to respond, you're not suppressing your feelings. You're observing them. You're learning which buttons they try to push and why they affect you. That moment of non-reaction becomes a mirror, reflecting not only their tactics, but your emotional habits. And when you can see clearly, you can choose wisely. Detachment isn't about turning off your emotions, it's about refusing to let someone else use them against you. When you stop reacting to the bait, the dynamic shifts. The toxic person loses interest. The game stops being fun. That's the power of emotional neutrality. It's not weakness, it's a choice. You're not withdrawing because you don't care. You're disengaging because you care too much about your peace to let someone else fracture it. There's a strange kind of power in silence, the kind that doesn't shout to be heard or rush to defend itself. It just exists, solid, grounded, immovable. And yet, we live in a world that constantly pressures us to respond, to clap back, to prove our point, to not let anything slide. But have you ever stopped to ask, who does all that responding really serve? Because more often than not, toxic people aren't looking for clarity. They're looking for control. And your reaction, your emotional energy, is their prize. When someone hurls words like weapons, the instinct is to fight back, to explain, argue, defend. But that's exactly what they're hoping for. A show, a spark, something they can latch onto and use. But when you meet their aggression with silence, something interesting happens. You rob them of the stage. You break the rhythm they've rehearsed in their head. As Marcus Aurelius put it, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. And what could be more unlike a person who thrives on chaos than someone who chooses stillness? That's silence. It's not passive. It's deliberate. It's the sound of self-control. Seneca once said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." Silence in the face of provocation is one of the hardest forms of adversity, because it challenges your ego. It dares you to rise above the moment rather than sink into it. And when you succeed, even just once, you start to realize how little power the other person actually has. It was never about what they said. It was always about what you did with what they said. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the darker, more reactive parts of ourselves that we often try to suppress or ignore. Choosing silence isn't about denying those parts. It's about mastering them, about recognizing that just because anger arises doesn't mean it needs to be expressed. Just because your pride is bruised doesn't mean you have to lash out. In that moment of silence, you're not running from the shadow. You're facing it and choosing not to let it drive the car. And here's the truth. When a toxic person loses their audience, they lose their grip. They're performers without a stage. Their monologue becomes meaningless in the absence of your emotional participation. They might escalate at first, poke harder, speak louder, try to provoke in new ways, but over time they realize something critical. You're not playing their game. You're not interested in trading jabs or justifying your worth, and that is devastating, to them, not to you. Silence becomes your boundary, your armor, your declaration that you no longer engage with manipulation disguised as conversation. You don't need to explain your peace, you just live it. And ironically, in that silence, you say everything that matters. You say, "You no longer have access to me." You say, "Your chaos won't enter my world." You say, "I am not yours to provoke." There are people in your life you can't just walk away from. Maybe it's a parent, a sibling, a co-worker you see every day. And when the relationship is laced with toxicity, that closeness becomes a trap. You can't block them, you can't ignore them, you can't move to another city just to find peace. So the question becomes, how do you stay sane when distance isn't an option? How do you protect your energy when the person draining it is sitting across the dinner table or sharing your office? This is where physical boundaries meet their match, and where mental detachment steps in as your secret weapon. The Stoics knew this dilemma well. Epictetus reminded us that it's not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. In other words, it's not just what people say or do, it's how we receive it, interpret it, internalize it. And that's something you can control. You may not be able to change their behavior, but you can absolutely change the way you relate to it. Picture yourself as a scientist observing a phenomenon, calm, neutral, objective. When someone makes a passive-aggressive comment or tries to guilt-trip you, don't take it personally. Instead, notice it. Name it. That's an attempt to manipulate. That's frustration disguised as criticism. You don't absorb the emotion. You just see it for what it is, data. And when you shift from participant to observer, everything changes. You're no longer in the storm. You're watching it pass through. Carl Jung spoke about the importance of inner distance. He said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." That irritation, that emotional sting, is often less about the other person and more about the unhealed places within us that respond to them. Mental detachment gives us space, not to suppress the pain, but to study it, to ask, why does this affect me so much? What part of me feels threatened here? What do I still need to strengthen within myself? The beauty of detachment is that it doesn't require confrontation. You don't need to change the other person. You simply disengage emotionally, internally. You stop giving their words and actions the power to shape your state of mind. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And when you fully realize it, you no longer need them to behave differently in order for you to feel at peace. This doesn't mean you become passive. You can still hold boundaries. You can still speak up when necessary. But you stop needing them to validate your emotions or understand your position. You stop feeding the dynamic with your reactivity. And slowly you begin to reclaim your emotional autonomy. It's not easy. Mental detachment is a practice, not a switch. You'll slip, you'll get triggered. But each time you pause, notice and choose observation over absorption, you build emotional resilience. You become the calm in the chaos, the stillness in the noise. And over time, you stop dancing to the rhythm of their dysfunction. There's a quiet strength that comes from knowing you're not alone, not in the battles you fight silently, not in the emotional storms you weather behind a calm face. As much as we like to think of ourselves as independent, resilient, unshakable, the truth is we all need anchors. People who remind us of who we are when we begin to forget. People who bring us back to center when toxic voices try to pull us off course. Even the strongest mind begins to waver in isolation. Even the most disciplined person needs somewhere to rest. The Stoics, often misunderstood as solitary sages, actually placed deep value on virtuous companionship. Seneca wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those whom you are capable of improving." To the Stoics, the right community wasn't just helpful, it was essential to living a life of reason, virtue, and peace. They believed that surrounding yourself with the right people could elevate your thinking, sharpen your values, and remind you of the path you've chosen when you're tempted to stray. Think about your inner circle. When you speak your truth, do they listen, or do they deflect, compete, or dismiss? When you're feeling emotionally exhausted, do they offer clarity and comfort, or chaos and judgment? Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." The people you consistently interact with are not neutral. They either feed your growth or feed your confusion. They either reinforce your boundaries or blur them. And over time, these interactions shape how you see yourself and how resilient you feel when under attack. Toxic people can distort your sense of reality. Gaslighting, undermining, constant negativity, it all chips away at your confidence, your clarity, your emotional stamina. But a healthy support system acts like an internal compass. It reminds you what's real. It reflects back your worth when you've temporarily forgotten it. It says, you're not crazy, you're not too sensitive, you're reacting like any human would under constant pressure. That kind of validation isn't weakness, it's recovery, it's healing in motion. And support doesn't always have to come from long-standing relationships. Sometimes we outgrow people we've known for years. Sometimes those closest to us are part of the problem. What matters more than history is harmony, shared values, mutual respect, a commitment to growth, individually and together. Whether it's a close friend, a therapist, an online community, or even a mentor you've never met in person but learned from deeply, the key is intentionality. Are you choosing people who mirror your ideals, who challenge you respectfully, who hold space for your humanity without needing to fix, shame, or silence you? Marcus Aurelius said, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a privilege it is to be alive, to think, to enjoy, to love." But it's hard to feel that privilege when you're constantly surrounded by emotional sabotage. To truly live with presence and peace, you need spaces and people where your mind can rest and your heart can breathe. There's a strange irony in how we treat ourselves. We defend our loved ones, we fight for our friends, we offer compassion to strangers. But when it comes to ourselves, our own emotional well-being, we often forget to show up. We push through stress. We ignore burnout. We say, "I'll rest later," while running on fumes. Why? Because somewhere along the way, we were taught that caring for ourselves is a luxury, that unless we're collapsing, we don't need rest. But here's the truth the Stoics knew well. Strength isn't about how much you endure. It's about how wisely you recover. Even Marcus Aurelius carved out moments to reflect, to write, to breathe. In his meditations, he reminds himself, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." That wasn't a poetic flourish. It was a strategy. When the world grows loud and pressure mounts, your first responsibility isn't to keep going. It's to retreat inward, to nourish that inner space so you can return to life grounded, not scattered. Self-care, in its deepest form, isn't about spa days or bubble baths, though those can certainly help. It's about reinforcing your psychological and emotional boundaries from the inside out. It's the daily check-in, the honest pause, the moment when you ask yourself, what do I need right now that I've been ignoring? For some, it's movement, a run, a quiet walk in nature. For others, it's stillness, meditation, journaling, breathing space between demands. And for many, it's creative expression, writing, painting, building something with your hands, anything that brings you back to the present moment. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." And to become anything of strength and meaning, you have to protect your energy. Because if you don't, others will drain it, intentionally or not. Toxic people prey on the unguarded, on the emotionally exhausted, on the ones too tired to fight back. But when your emotional battery is full, when your mind is clear and centered, you don't just resist manipulation, you rise above it. Their chaos doesn't stick, their bait doesn't land. Why? Because your inner world is already taken care of. There's no vacancy for drama. And yet, we neglect this truth far too often. We tell ourselves we don't have time, that other people's needs come first. But here's a Stoic reality check. How can you be of use to anyone if you're constantly running on empty? Seneca said it plainly, It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. And one of the greatest wastes, spending all your energy on others while leaving none for yourself. It's not noble, it's not sustainable, it's just a slow road to resentment and collapse. It's natural to take things personally. We're human. When someone lashes out at you, criticizes you, belittles you, it hits a nerve. It stings. And your first instinct is often to question yourself. What did I do? Did I deserve that? Is there something wrong with me? But here's a liberating truth that most people never realize. Much of the toxicity directed at you has nothing to do with you. The harsh words, the unpredictable moods, the manipulative games, those are symptoms of someone else's internal chaos, not a reflection of your worth. Think about it. When someone is drowning in insecurity, fear, anger, or shame, that energy has to go somewhere. And if they've never learned how to process it, they project it outward. You just happen to be in the line of fire. Carl Jung called this projection, the act of casting your own unacceptable traits onto others because they're too painful to own. He wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But the reverse is also true. Everything that irritates others about you often says more about them than it does about anything you've done. Now imagine seeing that dynamic clearly, without taking it on. Think of negativity like storm clouds. When someone close to you is in a dark place, you may feel the tension in their words, the weight in their presence, the pressure of their disapproval. But just like clouds in the sky, their storm is not your fault, and it certainly doesn't change the essence of who you are. The sky remains untouched, even as the storm rages. You don't control the clouds, you simply choose whether or not to stand in the rain. This is what the Stoics mastered. Epictetus taught that other people's opinions are none of your concern, a radical idea, especially today. But it's also profoundly freeing. When you internalize this, something clicks. You are not responsible for someone else's emotional instability. Their disapproval doesn't make you wrong. Their anger doesn't mean you failed. Their bitterness doesn't mean you're to blame. It's not that you stop caring altogether. Detachment doesn't mean coldness. It means clarity. You can have empathy for someone suffering without carrying the burden of it. You can recognize that their cruelty stems from their pain without letting it define your reality. You stop dancing to the rhythm of their dysfunction and start standing firmly in your own tempo. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject. And you, being the subject of your own life, know more than anyone else about what truly resides within you. Why give power to those who haven't earned it? Why allow someone else's unresolved trauma to rewrite the narrative of who you are?" It's a difficult pill to swallow, especially when you care deeply about someone. When you see their pain, their patterns, their self-sabotage, you want to help. Maybe you've tried being patient, explaining yourself endlessly, offering solutions, giving second chances, hoping that something you say or do will finally flip the switch for them. But here's the uncomfortable truth. You can't fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed. And the more you try, the more it drains you. Slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly, until one day you wake up completely exhausted and wonder how you got so far from your own peace. Carl Jung once wrote, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it." That includes other people, especially the ones wrapped so tightly in their own trauma, ego, or denial that they can't even see the problem, let alone be willing to face it. And when you place yourself in the position of fixer, you unconsciously take on a burden that was never yours to carry. That burden isn't just heavy, it's endless, because no matter how much love, logic, or support you offer, true change can only come from within them. It's an inside job, not a rescue mission. Epictetus reminds us, "It is not in our power to have whatever we want, but to do what we ought to do. Nor is it in our power to be healthy or rich, but to be true to ourselves." In other words, your power lies not in changing others, but in embodying your own values, consistently, quietly, unwaveringly. Lead by example, set the standard, and then step back. Because real influence doesn't come from control, it comes from presence, from being so grounded in your own peace, your own growth, that others begin to notice and, if they're ready, start to shift on their own. It's tempting to think that with enough effort, you can guide them back to clarity, that if you just find the right words, the perfect moment, the most compassionate way to confront them, they'll finally wake up. But that hope, however noble, becomes a trap, because the more you focus on their healing, the more you neglect your own. You put your growth on pause to manage their emotional mess, and over time, their chaos becomes your normal. Their moods dictate your energy. Their drama becomes the air you breathe, and that's when you realize you're not helping them heal. You're just joining them in their wound. Seneca once said, "Show me a man who is content with his lot, and I will show you a man who has mastered himself." And mastering yourself means knowing when to step away, not in bitterness, not in defeat, but in peace. In the calm recognition that your path is your responsibility, theirs is theirs. You can offer support, sure. You can hold space. You can love them deeply, but you cannot walk their path for them. You cannot want their healing more than they do. So what do you do instead? You focus inward. You redirect all that effort and energy into becoming the kind of person you admire. You strengthen your boundaries. You prioritize your own mental clarity. You grow, not loudly, not performatively, but steadily. And in doing so, you create something far more powerful than persuasion, inspiration. Not everyone will rise with you, but the ones who are ready will see your example, and they'll follow not because you pushed, but because you led. There comes a moment, quiet but undeniable, when something inside you says, "I can't keep doing this." Not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of sheer exhaustion. You've tried patience, you've tried empathy, you've bent over backward trying to make things work, hoping they'd change, that things would feel different, lighter, easier, but they don't. And at some point, you realize that staying is costing you more than leaving ever will. This is one of the most difficult choices a person can make, deciding to walk away from someone who has woven themselves into your life, but poisons it little by little. It's not always about dramatic abuse or outright cruelty. Sometimes it's subtle, emotional neglect, manipulative guilt, a constant drip of disrespect that wears you down like water on stone. And still, you hesitate, because walking away feels like failure, like giving up, like breaking something you were supposed to fix. But here's the truth. Walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." And how many of us aren't really living because we're too entangled in relationships that drain our spirit? We convince ourselves that loyalty means staying, even when staying costs us our peace. But loyalty to others should never come at the expense of loyalty to yourself. If you're constantly sacrificing your emotional well-being just to maintain the illusion of harmony, then you're not in a relationship, you're in a prison. Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And one of the hardest confrontations we face is looking honestly at the relationships we've outgrown. There's grief in that. There's fear. Because endings are never just about the other person. They're also about the parts of ourselves we have to leave behind. the version of us that tolerated too much, that stayed silent too long, that clung to hope while enduring harm. Letting go means honoring the lessons, not resenting them. It means saying, "Thank you for what you taught me, but I'm ready to grow without you." And make no mistake, it's growth. It's a profound declaration of self-respect to choose peace over patterns, clarity over confusion, and truth over denial. When you finally step out of the toxic fog, you don't just gain space, you regain yourself. Your thoughts become clearer, your body feels lighter. You stop bracing for the next emotional ambush. And in that stillness, you begin to remember who you were before you were made to feel small. Seneca reminds us, "As is a tale, so is life." Not how long it is, but how good it is what matters. So ask yourself, is this connection making your life good? Or is it just making it longer, heavier, harder to breathe in? Prioritizing your well-being doesn't make you selfish. It makes you sane. It makes you strong. And while the discomfort of walking away might feel sharp at first, it fades. What replaces it is something far more powerful: dignity, clarity, freedom. There's a question most people never think to ask at the end of a toxic relationship, not because it isn't important, but because it's uncomfortable. Have you forgiven yourself? Not the other person, not the one who lied, manipulated, dismissed, or drained you. That's their work to do. The real question is, have you let go of the guilt, the shame, the self-blame you've been quietly carrying ever since? Because here's what no one tells you. When you finally walk away, the damage doesn't just vanish. Even after the toxic person is gone, their voice can linger. In your head, in your habits, in your hesitation to trust again. And often, the most persistent voice isn't theirs, it's your own. Why did I stay so long? Why didn't I see it earlier? How could I have let this happen? It's subtle, but relentless, and it weighs you down more than the person ever did. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." But that choice begins with a release, not just of the other person's grip, but of your own punishment. Forgiveness, when turned inward, isn't about denying your mistakes. It's about understanding them. It's saying, yes, I didn't act perfectly. Yes, I ignored red flags. Yes, I lost myself for a while, but I survived. I grew, and I'm still here. Forgiveness of self is not weakness. It's the highest form of strength, because it takes real courage to sit with your pain, acknowledge your part in it, and still offer yourself compassion. The Stoics taught this through action, not sentiment. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily to meet the world as it is, not how he wished it to be, and that included meeting himself with honesty and mercy. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. He wasn't excusing their behavior, he was freeing himself from being defined by it. Now picture this, a heavy bag you've carried for years, filled with regrets, silent accusations, unresolved feelings. You've lugged it into every new relationship, every new day. And maybe you've grown used to the weight. Maybe you've even convinced yourself you need it, to remember the lessons, to protect yourself. But what if putting it down didn't mean forgetting? What if it meant finally being free? Resentment is a prison we build for ourselves, brick by brick. We think it protects us, but it only traps us in the past. Forgiving yourself is tearing down those walls, one breath at a time. It's letting the lessons stay, but letting the suffering go. It's not about pretending everything's fine. It's about saying, that chapter is over, and I don't have to keep rereading it to know what it taught me. Seneca believed that life should be measured not by its length, but by its depth, by its quality. And carrying emotional baggage doesn't make life deeper, it just makes it heavier. So ask yourself honestly, what am I still carrying that no longer serves me? What parts of the story have I outgrown but haven't yet released? You don't need a grand ritual. You don't need a perfect moment. You just need a willingness to soften, to say, I did the best I could with what I knew at the time. And that's enough. That's always been enough. Let this be the moment you choose peace over patterns, clarity over chaos, and self-respect over silent suffering. You're not here to be anyone's emotional punching bag. You're here to grow, to rise, and to protect your inner world like it matters, because it does. If you found strength in this, there's more waiting. Watch the next video on your screen and keep building the emotional resilience you deserve.